Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're doing well. Okay, today we're going to do a full review of the Saucony Dolphin Speed Freeze after like 744 kilometers of running mileage in them. So quick disclaimer, this video is not sponsored by Saucony or anyone in any kind of way. I'm just reviewing these shoes because I felt like it. These are just my opinions and my experiences of it, and yeah, I bought them online with my own money. Okay, so let's go through some of the specs of the shoe. Firstly, they're marketed as a performance shoe, so like for speed workouts and maybe some races, I guess. The shoe type and the foot profile type is also neutral, so yeah, there's pretty much like no support elements. In terms of the upper technology they use, it's called like form fit. It's pretty much just mesh. It's a bit stretchy, and it's like designed to like hug every part of your foot and like have a personalized fit and feel. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, it is pretty comfy. It is pretty roomy. The heel counter is a bit firm, so like, you know, if I try to squeeze it, it's a bit firm and it's kind of hard to press through, but it's not too thick as well. The tongue is gusseted. That means it's sort of attached to the upper. It's sort of like sewn in, so it doesn't really like slide around too much. And the laces they use are like stretchy flat ones, so like it's a bit stretchy, you see, and yeah, it's flat as well. But also the laces might depend on the variant you have as well. The insole is pretty minimal, it's pretty thin as well. In terms of the midsole, they use something called like PowerRun PB. It's made of like pebbled P-bar polymer, so like it's pretty much like small blobby things that become like one whole piece of foam. It's pretty lightweight with like pretty good energy return, and it's pretty bouncy as well. There's also like a wing nylon plate that runs along the midsole, and you can sort of see the cutout here that shows you where it is. It makes the shoe a bit firmer but not too stiff compared to like a carbon plate, and that just gives a bit more responsiveness and like snappiness to the shoe, I guess. In terms of the underfoot geometry, there's something called like speed roll. That's like their proprietary thing. It's just the shape of the shoe. It's kind of rocket, so it sort of helps you roll forward a bit more like into your next stride, I guess. In terms of the outsole, they use something called the XT900. That's pretty much like carbon rubber or carbon infused rubber, I guess. Really good traction in dry weather, questionable traction in wet weather, and like, yeah, very durable as well. In terms of the stack height, it's like 36 millimeters in the heel and like 28 millimeters in the forefoot, so that's like an 8 millimeter drop. It weighs like around 230 grams for like the US size 9. My one's like 9.5 US and like 2E width, so that's like probably like down 235 grams. The full retail price is like around $107 USD, and in Australia here it's like around $207 AUD. And there's also a few variants as well. There's the norm width one, so that's like D width for men and also B width for women. And there's also the wide width, so that's like 2E for men and also D for women. In terms of the wide variant, there's only one colorway, and that's pretty much the one I have right now. It's this one. It's called a black/gold struck. There's also the Run Shield one, which is like pretty much the same shoe but has like a more water resistant upper and a bit of a firm layer to keep it like warm and dry doing like wet running days, I guess. Haven't really tried it, but it's probably less breathable but more water resistant. There's also the VisiPro variant, so that's pretty much the same shoe but has a bit more reflective elements. Sometimes the laces are a bit more reflective as well. Pretty much the same midsole, same upper material, but yeah, just a bit more reflective, I guess. Earlier this year, between like January to March, I was pretty much training for like some 5 and 10Ks. There's pretty much only 2 shoes in my rotation, so there's pretty much the Brooks Glycerin 20s, which is my daily trainer, and then there was the Hyperion Tempos, which are like my speedier shoes, I guess. I pretty much just finished a 10K training cycle, and I was wearing my Hyperion Tempos for pretty much all my speed workouts. I feel like the Hyperion Tempos were a bit like too firm, I guess. I was kind of curious to see what kind of like softer or like more responsive shoes there were in the market. So I pretty much went online and looked for some like performance-oriented shoes or like some more up-tempo daily trainers, I guess. And yeah, like the Speed Freeze were one of the first results that came up. I had a look at some of the reviews online, and it looks like the general consensus was that the speeds are good, plus they had a different midsole tech compared to like my Hyperion Tempos. I feel like might as well give it a try, right? It also came like a 2E width, which is like pretty good. I don't think there were many like up-tempo shoes that were like in like wider variants, I guess. So yeah, these really got me interested. So yeah, I pretty much went online, looked for like some good deals, I guess. And I saw that Running Warehouse got for like $170 AUD, which is like, you know, almost 40% off the RRP of like $270. So yeah, pretty much bought it, got delivered. It was like around late March. The moment I got it and I put it on, it just felt like super tall and roomy, I guess. It was pretty much taller than my Brooks Glycerin 20s, which I thought were like super tall shoes in general. When you sort of wear the Hyperion Tempos for a long time, any other taller shoe than that just feels super tall. Very lightweight as well for like how bulky it appeared. It did have like a sort of funky smell, like out of the box, I guess. It's sort of like a factory plastic kind of smell. I was really surprised that this was like a speed shoe, given how tall it was and like given my limited experience in shoes in general. It was only a bit heavier than my Tempos, but I already felt like this had way more cushioning and like it would probably be more responsive, I guess. I noticed that the laces are very long as well. I mean, given that I was stretchy too, but in general, it's just very long. There's like enough room for like heel lock lacing, I guess. So yeah, that's also a big plus. Overall, a very accommodating upper. The midsole wasn't super soft by any means. Like I'm talking about comparing to like the New Balance FeelCell V3, I guess, for example. That is soft. It is sort of firm to stand on, but it also felt very springy when I walked in them. So I had a feeling like, you know, if you go fast in these shoes, they'll probably respond better. But when you just like stand around and just walk around it doesn't feel soft by any means. But maybe because I'm not too heavy. In terms of my profile, I'm like 175 centimeters tall, and I weigh anywhere between like 70 to 75 kilograms. It's not like I had a sink-in feeling when I stood in the shoe, basically. My first run in them were like some intervals. It felt very fast compared to my Tempos, but it was more like I didn't have to try as hard. I feel like I was able to sustain my pace much better than Tempos, and pretty much I felt more fresh at the end of my run. So for someone who's pretty much training in the Brooks Glycerin 20s and like the Brooks Hyperion Tempo for like a while, the speeds are like a massive upgrade. In terms of usage, in the early months of having this shoe, I pretty much used it for all my speed workouts. So that includes like intervals, anything from like 400 meters up to like mile repeats, tempo and threshold runs. That could be anything from like 20 minutes at lactate threshold pace, and that's like continuous, to almost like 40 minutes at tempo pace, and also strides as part of my warm for like fast runs, I guess. I did some time trials and races as well, so like 5Ks and park runs, and also like 10Ks, and also like city surf race as well. I never used it for like a half marathon race or like a full marathon race. To be honest, I feel like it's fine for that. I would take this to like a half marathon race and I feel like I'd still do pretty well in them. For like a full marathon race, I'd probably have to size up because I feel like my feet would probably swell and like, you know, I'll probably get discomforts if I don't. I didn't really specifically use these shoes for recovery or my general aerobic runs. I pretty much had the New Balance FuelCell Rebel V3s for that. And then as part of my marathon training in May to like September this year, I pretty much use it for long runs as well, including like marathon pace runs. That's anywhere from like 24 to 35 kilometers. I pretty much only ran on footpaths and pavements with this shoe, so pretty much like concrete, asphalt, tarmac, that kind of stuff. Never really took off-road, so like no trails, no grass. The traction was absolutely fine on dry surfaces. I mostly use the speeds for like fast paces, so I'm pretty nervous when it comes to like damp, wet surfaces, but surprisingly, I never really slipped. And also at the same time, I don't have much confidence in the traction either. So yeah, it's pretty risky when it comes to wet surfaces. I never really ran through like deep puddles either, so yeah, I don't really know how that hold up as well. Somehow I never ran with these shoes in like full rain or anything. The upper is very light and breathable, but it's not super thin by any means. So I imagine it would retain a fair bit of water if this got like soaked, I guess. But good breathability probably means it probably dry up fairly quickly as well. I believe this shoe accommodates all types of foot strikes. I've done plenty of like heel striking, mid-foot, and like forefoot striking this shoe, and yeah, they're all fine, I guess. I also didn't have issues with like the midsole like firming up during cold weather as well, but it did get a bit softer during like warm weather, I guess. They felt very responsive compared to like my glycerins or my tempos. I guess a simple way to put it is that the glycerins and the tempos are both made from like EVA foam, so like they're firmer, they're a bit more old school, they're a bit older tech than this kind of like PEBA based foam. It's like the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. I feel like the speeds have like a higher ceiling, if that makes sense. So like I can put more energy into this and get more return, but like if I put more energy into the tempos than like what I'm used to, it just starts hurting, I guess, or it just starts to become like a lot of work, I guess. I think they're okay for like slower paces, but they are sort of uncomfortable to use as well, because it does feel like you have to hold back a bit to go slow, I guess. Just based on the shoe's aggressive shape and also like the foam, I guess, like it just makes you want to go fast. So yeah, I didn't want to use it for like my recovery runs. During the later parts of the long runs, I did feel like the speeds got a bit mushy as well. I feel like there wasn't that much energy return later on in the long runs. And during that point, I'd rather have something a bit more firm to keep me going, I guess. But I wouldn't blame the shoes for that. I feel like it's probably just like fatigue or like my fitness level at the time. Overall, it's really good at sustaining like longer, faster efforts, I guess. In terms of the discomforts, I did experience some slight hot spots on like my fifth metatarsal on my left foot, and also some numb toes doing my long runs that go for like longer than 2 hours. I think it's because my feet expand, like, you know, the shoes start to feel a bit cramped. I have like slightly wide foot myself, anywhere between like 8 to 2E width on my left foot, but I don't really get this issue doing like my speed workouts. It's kind of strange because these shoes are very roomy for me, but like at the same time, like it does feel cramped in the later parts of my long runs, and that's probably like a me issue. It's not really the shoes problem. I think next time I buy another pair, I'll probably just get like a half size up or something, or like a full size up even. And the other discomfort probably comes from the lacing. Because the laces are somewhat stretchy and the shoes kind of roomy, sometimes you have to really cinch it up tightly to like get like a good lockdown. And sometimes if you tie it too tightly, given that they're like stretchy laces, you sort of like put too much pressure on the top of your foot, so that makes your feet go numb a bit, I guess. You might have to play around the lacing to see what works for you. You might have to swap out the laces with something that's still flat but not stretchy, and that might like not cause issues. But yeah, it's very rare. For the most part, I didn't have that discomfort. It's only when I was rushing to lace and I tied it really tight, and yeah, that's when it happens, I guess. Okay, let's go through the condition of the shoe after like 744 kilometers of running in them. Okay, let's start with the upper. It's still in excellent condition. It's pretty much like no wear and tear for me. The markings have sort of cracked a bit, but it doesn't really affect the functionality for me personally. The shoes haven't been soaked in rain, so like I don't know that will affect durability in any way. In terms of the midsole, visually it's a bit dirty and all, but like it still feels great. I have worn through the heel a tiny bit on the sides, I guess. Hasn't really affected performance in any way. It still feels very springy overall. I don't remember how firm the plate used to be. I can still flex the shoe a bit, but I don't remember if that was the case since day one. In terms of the outsole, it's obviously worn down quite a fair bit. This is probably like a 6 out of 10 right now, but I find that it's still very usable for me. Hasn't really peeled off yet. I find that the traction is still excellent on dry surfaces. Uncertain about the wear. That's pretty much what you can expect out of carbon rubber, I guess. In terms of like performance and the ride after all this time, I feel like it's still really good. I don't have like a new pair to compare it with, but like I'm not really fussed about the performance either. Like I feel like it's held up really well. If anything, I feel like the insole has like sort of compressed a bit, and that might affect how the shoe feels, but like otherwise the overall feel of the shoe is still excellent. Like I need like a new pair to really compare it to, but otherwise this still feels like it has plenty of life left for me personally. I feel like I can use this shoe for quite a while longer. I'm talking like over like 1500 kilometers. I probably shouldn't and I probably won't, but yeah, I can definitely take this shoe to like 1500 kilometers if I don't really destroy it in some crazy way. It's still active in my current shoe rotation. Okay, let's go through what I think are the pros and cons of the shoe. So let's start with the pros first. So firstly, it's very lightweight for stack height. It's a pretty tall shoe in my opinion, and it's pretty lightweight for what it is. The upper is very comfy. The midsole is very responsive, given like its rocky geometry and also like the PU-based foam and also like the nylon plate. It feels quite stable due to how wide the base is, and also the traction is pretty good on dry surfaces. And I feel like it's very durable overall. There's a wide variant, but I feel like if you have like slightly wide feet, you can actually go to normal sizing, I reckon. I feel like the wide version has a bit more material, not necessarily a wider base. So I feel like I could get away with like a normal width variant as well. Let's go through some of the cons of this shoe. Firstly, you might not have much confidence running with these shoes on like wet surfaces. So yeah, it might be a bit slippery as well. You might feel like the shoes will bottom out on like long runs, I guess. And this might depend on how heavy you are or how you run. The laces are a bit of a preference thing, but I feel like stretchy laces aren't too secure on this shoe. I feel like flat laces might be better. This might not affect everyone, but the shoe is quite roomy in general. So if you have narrow feet, you might have issues with getting like good lockdown. Even if you cinch up tightly, your foot might still slide around, I guess. And because you lace up tightly, you might get like discomfort as well, you know, too much pressure on the top of your foot. So this might not be the shoe for people with like narrow feet. And finally, this might not really be a con, but I feel like because of how wide the base is, it's very stable in room, which is great, but I feel like it might not feel as fast. If the speed frees are a bit more narrow in the base, I feel like it might feel a bit faster, but at the same time, it might be less comfortable. And that's pretty much what the Speed 2s or the Endorphin Pro 3s are, I guess. Okay, I forgot to record this part in the initial video, but let's go through some of the shoes that I've looked into or considered when I was trying to find alternatives to the Speeds. These would be like speed, performance, up-tempo trainers with like fairly comfy upper, kind of high stack and cushioning, springy and responsive midsole, but still relatively lightweight. It could be plated or not, but probably not carbon plated, I guess, and maybe an aggressive rocker. Keep in mind, I've never run in these shoes before, so it's too much gonna be info from the reviews I've seen online, I guess. So the first shoe is probably the Adidas Boston 12. Apparently, the upper is kind of thin and meshy and kind of plasticky, so it's not very comfy. The platform is kind of narrow overall, and it does come in wide sizing, but that probably depends on location. There's like none in Australia, I guess. It is a bit taller than the Speeds. It comes in like around 38mm heel, 31mm forefoot, so that's like a 7mm drop. It's a bit heavier than the Speeds. It comes in like around 267 grams in size 9 US men. The upper half, the midsole, is Light Strike Pro, which is Adidas's premier midsole foam. It's very springy and bouncy, I guess. And the bottom half is like Light Strike 2.0. That's a bit more like stable and responsive. There's also like energy rods in the shoe as well. It's like made of glass fiber or something. It adds more like stability and responsiveness to the midsole foam, I guess. And finally, the Continental Outer Rubber has like really good durability and like excellent traction in both wet and dry conditions. Overall, the Bostons are definitely a shoe to consider if you want like a more responsive version of the Speeds with like superior traction, but it's slightly heavier and maybe less comfy in terms of the upper. Then we have the Brooks Hyperion Max. This has a very thin but supportive and comfy upper. It only comes in like a standard width. It's not too narrow, it's not too wide. I had tried it on and it's surprisingly comfortable. It's almost as tall as the Speeds. It's like 34mm heel, 26 in the forefoot, and so that makes like 8mm drop. It is super light, it's like 213 grams. In terms of the midsole, they use DNA Flash, so it's kind of firm and not very springy, but it is very light and responsive. There's no plate in there. In terms of the outsole, they use something called green rubber. It has very high durability and like pretty good traction in the dry, but probably not as good traction in the wet. Overall, the Hyperion Max is definitely a shoe to consider if you'd rather have like a firmer, lighter, and more responsive version of the Speeds, but it's gonna be more firm, less springy. Then we have the Hoka Mac X. The upper is made of like very light mesh. I think the feeling of it is probably very similar to the Speeds. The stack height is taller than the Speeds, so it has like a 39mm heel, 34mm forefoot, 5mm drop. It is a bit heavier than the Speeds at like 266 grams and in like US size 9 men's. In terms of the midsole, the upper half is P-bar, so that's very soft and springy, and there's like a P-back plate in the middle. The bottom half of the midsole is made of AVA foam for like extra stability and responsiveness, working with the plate as well, I guess. In terms of the outsole, they use something called like Durabrasion. Pretty good durability and like traction. Overall, the Mac X is definitely a shoe to consider if you'd like a softer, springy version of the Speeds, but it is slightly heavier and comes with like lower drop, and lower drop does affect the ride, so yeah, that might be something to consider as well. And then we have the Puma Deviate Nitro 2. So this has like a very soft and light and thin mesh upper. The platform overall is quite narrow, but there is a wide sizing. Again, this depends on location. I don't think the wide variant exists in Australia. It is a bit taller than Speeds. It comes in like around 37mm heel, 31mm forefoot, and that equates to like a 6mm drop. It is a bit heavier than the Speeds at 257 grams in like US size 9 men's. The midsole they use is called Nitro Elite. It's very soft and springy. There is a plate inside there. It's called like Power Plate. It's like a carbon composite plate, so it is kind of firm but still somewhat flexible, and it's very similar to the Speeds nylon plate, but it's not as stiff as a carbon plate. The outsole they use is called Prima Grip. There's plenty of it on the sole of the shoe, and it's very durable with like excellent traction in both wet and dry. Overall, the Deviate Nitros are definitely a shoe to consider if you'd rather have like a more snug version of the Speeds, basically. So it's more suitable for people with like narrow feet, I guess, and the traction is like superior as well, but it is slightly heavier. And then finally we have the Topo Spectre. So this has a really lightweight, comfy mesh upper with like an anatomical toe box, so it's kind of roomy and wide and very accommodating, I guess. Very similar height to the Speeds. It comes in like around 35mm in the heel, 30mm in the forefoot, and that equates to like a 5mm drop. It's pretty much almost the same weight as the Speeds, so it comes like around 232 grams in the size 9 US men's. The midsole uses P-backs, which is very lightweight and springy, and that's inside like an EVA frame, so the EVA frame like kind of wraps the P-backs midsole, and the reason they do that is to add like stability and responsiveness. There's no plate in the shoe, and find the outsole is very thin, but it's quite durable and grippy on like dry surfaces, maybe not on wet surfaces, I guess. So overall, the Spectres are definitely a shoe to consider if you like a lower drop and like comfy version of the Speeds, but maybe less responsive, I guess. The Saucony Endorphin Speed 3s are pretty much my main speed shoe ever since I got it. I've used it for like plenty of speed workouts, like races throughout this year, and even for like long runs doing my marathon training. If you have like slightly wide to like wide feet, they're pretty accommodating. It's light, it's stable, it's responsive, and in general, it has been very reliable for me. Even after 744 kilometers of running in it, I'd still use it with confidence today, and I'll definitely come back to get another pair later on as well. If you're in the market for like a versatile up-tempo shoe, like, you know, you can use for like lots of type of runs, including like, you know, intervals, tempo runs, long runs, and maybe recovery runs if you can make it work. And if it suits your foot profile and your width, then absolutely go for it. I think you'll enjoy it. For those of you who are considering it, if you get a chance to try in person, definitely give it a try. For those of you who have the Speed 3s, let me know your experience in the comments below. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you guys. Thanks for watching, have a nice day. Bye.